Hello friends, in this video we shall learn about the chapter 6, that is People's Resistance Against the British before 1857. So before the revolt of 1857, many incidents occurred and which indicate that Indians were unhappy with the British rule. And different groups like artisan, tribal, rulers, soldiers and common people expressed their anger in various ways. Their resistance can be divided into three broader categories. First one is civil rebellion, second one is tribal rebellion, and the third one is peasant movement. So let's see and what is written over here. Before the revolt of 1857, several incidents occurred which indicated that there was growing resentment against the British rule. This resentment was expressed by different groups in the different regions of India. So we have understood that how that Indians were unhappy and they resisted against Britishers in three broad categories. There were civil rebellions, there were tribal rebellions and peasant movement as well. Under the civil rebellion, the revolt was done by the kings, landlords and the common people who lost power and wealth due to the British policies. So this was the reason of the civil rebellion. The British took the land and money from the Indian ruler and they have increased the taxes and interfered in the social customs. Now, a few examples for the civil rebellion were revolt of Raja of Vijayanagaram in 1794, Polygar rebellion in Tamil Nadu, then a revolt of Velu Thampi, Travancore, then Wahhabi movement. All those were the example of the civil rebellion. People's resistance, meaning in this context, the people's resistance against the British rule termed people included many sections like peasant, artisan, tribal ruling classes, active or dispossessed, military, personnel, under company as well as demobilized soldiers of ex-rulers. Those soldiers who do not move with their ex-ruler, and religious leaders like Hindu and Muslim religious leaders, etc. The interest of these resistance differed in the sense that each section had different grievances, but they agreed on the same objective to end the British rule. The people's resistance has been divided into three broad forms: civil rebellion, tribal rebellion and peasant movement. Now, military rebellion have also been considered as the form of people's resistance, which included Indians serving in the company's army. So the tribal people also resisted against the British rule. That comes under the tribal rebellion. The reason was that British took the tribal land for farming and imposed new taxes and restricted their traditional way of life. For example, Munda rebellion, Santhal rebellion, Bhil rebellion, Coal uprising, etc. And then we have peasant movement. Peasant revolted because they suffered due to high taxes and exploitation by the landlord and the British. Heavy taxes were imposed, unfair treatment were done, and economic hardships they were suffering through. So all those result in the peasant movement. For example, Indigo revolt, Pabna revolt, Deccan riots, all those things were the example of the peasant movement. Now, we have military rebels also, which come under the people's resistance, and the Indian soldiers who were serving the company's army were the part of the military rebellion. Next is genesis of the people's resistance. So genesis means origin, means beginning of the people's resistance. So peasants were unhappy with high land taxes. British policies destroyed Indian farmers' lives, and many revolts started with the peasant united against the landlord and the British officers. Thus, before the revolt of 1857, many small and big rebellions showed that Indians were dissatisfied with the British rule, and these revolts later inspired the Great Uprising of the 1857 revolt. In pre-colonial India, protests of the people against the ruler and their officials were not uncommon. Demands for higher land revenue, corrupt practices and strict attitude of officials, etc. But the ruler had to pay attention to their grievances and problems. However, the colonial rule and its policy had a far more devastating impact on the Indians. The company was only interested in extracting revenue, and there were no one to listen to their complaints or pay attention to their problem. Colonial law and the judiciary protected the interest of the government and its allies. So landlord, traders, moneylenders, and due to which the people were left with no other option but to take up arms. The circumstances of the tribal people were also not different, and the encroachment of outsiders into their independent tribal polity made them more oppressed and violent. So this means that the protests in the pre-colonial India were growing. Before the British rule, protests against the ruler were common, but ruler had to listen to the people's complaints. And the reason for the protest were the high land revenue, that is the heavy taxes on the farmer, then corrupt officials, that the unfair treatment done by the local rulers, and the strict policies, the harsh laws and punishments. So, impact of this British rule is that the British were the only focusing on collecting the revenue and making profit. They did not care about the people's problem or listen to their complaints. So the colonial laws protected only the British government, landlords, traders, and the moneylender. So farmers, poor people, and tribals had no support, and they suffered greatly. Similarly, the condition of the tribals who lived independently in the forest and the hill, the British and the outsiders took their land and forced them to work for them, and this made them angry and violent, leading to many tribal revolts. So thus the oppression and the unfair policies of the British forced common people, peasant and tribal to revolt against the colonial rule. So this we have understood under this passage. The next one is the causative factor for people's uprising. The main factors responsible for the people's resentment and uprising against the colonial rules are as follows. Colonial land revenue settlement, heavy burden of new taxes, eviction of the peasant from their lands, and encroachment on the tribal's land, exploitation in rural society by intermediary, revenue collector, tenants, and moneylenders. Due to the expansion of the revenue on tribal lands, the tribal people lost their possession over agriculture and forest lands. Promotions of British manufactured goods, heavy duties on Indian industries, especially export duties, which devastated the Indian handloom and handicraft industries due to the destruction of the indigenous industry worker were migrating from the industry to agriculture, and due to which the pressure on the land agriculture was increasing. So in this passage we have learned that the problem with the land and revenue system had increased. The British introduced new land settlement system, like we have already discussed those of permanent settlement, Rayatwari, Mahalwari, etc. That increased the tax burden. Heavy taxes forced many farmers into debt, and peasants were evicted from their land if they could not pay the taxes. Tribal lost their land as outsiders took over the forest and the agricultural areas. So there were economic exploitation as well. And British traders exploited Indian farmers and artisans for the profit. Indian agriculture, handicrafts, all those things suffered a lot because of British manufactured goods flooding throughout the market. And high export duties were imposed on the Indian product, making it difficult to trade. And many handlooms worker and the artisan, they have lost their jobs and were forced to become farmer, and increasing pressure on the land. So social and economic inequality has been created, and British rule protected landlords, traders and moneylenders, but they ignored the common people, and peasant workers and tribal faced exploitation and oppressions. So the local economy suffered as money was drained out from India. And all this leads to the civil uprising, which is our next topic. The term civil includes everything which is not defense military related, but here we have included those rebellions which were generally led by deposed natives or their descendants, former landlords, zamindars, polygars, naikas, in return for military services and tribute, former retainers and officials of conquered state, or sometime by religious leaders. So, deposed native ruler means the Indian king or ruler who was removed from the power by the Britishers. Okay. So, few examples of deposed ruler are Nana Sahib, Rani Lakshmibai, Begum Hazrat Mahal, and all these deposed rulers, will led the revolt against the British rule in 1857. And what is this civil uprising? So civil uprising means rebellions led by the native ruler, landlord and religious leaders against the British rule. So not related to the military revolts basically. Many rebellions were led by the deposed ruler. We have understood those who have lost their kingdoms, the former landlords or the zamindars who lost their land due to the British policies. The polygar, naikas and the local chiefs, they are the religious leaders who resisted the British colonial rule and the British control. The religious leader and the tenant farmers who mobilized people against unfair rule. Unemployed artisans and demobilized soldiers were also the part, and thus all the unfair taxation, loss of land, economic hardship and British exploitation led to various uprisings called as colonial rule, called as civil uprising against the colonial rule. So we have understood that how all these unfair taxation and economic hardship and the British exploitation moreover led to the civil uprising against the British rule or the colonial rule. In the next video, we shall learn about the major causes of the civil uprising. Till then, keep learning.